Is Alyssa? Okay.
James, but Cece.
She's here. That's right. I well, we'll figure it out. Okay. Oh. LeBron, I thought you were here.
Yeah, just I thought I'd take a test today, but no. So I went to the play to get my shot and just went back home.
Ah,
That's it.
gotcha. Well, then the only person we're missing Alyssa and Randall. What about Randall? Is he not here today? That guy. Some camp? Crazy. Okay. Well, hate for them to miss today because we're finishing the book. But before we finish the book, let me walk you through a couple of little things. Let me plug in here so everyone can see.
It's 11 o'clock.
Thank you. What's this reminder I have at 11? Pay my rent. It's the 1st. And I will. I will pay my rent. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, let me share my screen with you guys and I'll show you 2 things. The first, this is one of our last daily grades. Actually, let me just look ahead at our daily grades. Ba-ba-da-ba-bum. This might be our last daily grade, actually. Sure enough, I believe it is. So that's Gatsby open-ended questions. This is our final daily grade. So there's 20 questions and you are choosing 10 to answer. You only have to do half of these. Yes. And they're from the whole book. So, and some of them are, most of them are pretty opinion based. Like if you look at these, there's questions like, did Daisy really love Gatsby? What about Tom? Did she really love Tom? Yeah, just 10 of these. Was Tom or Gatsby a worse person? I think we all share the same opinion there. But these are all they're opinion based, open-ended discussion questions, and these are due Thursday. The other thing that I have here is an extra credit opportunity. So obviously you do not have to do this. It's just for some of you. If you feel like you need the extra credit. There's a podcast that is listed right here.
This episode of the Art of Manliness podcast is brought to you by
Yep. It's about 33 minutes and you'd listen to it and answer these questions. These are in order of the of when you listen to it. So you could even like go through it as you're listening and answer these questions. And that could really boost your grade if you do that. So that being said, yes.
Or the open question stuff, whatever. Like, are we done doing science?
Well, we still have our Gatsby test, and then we'll have one final project that you can be pretty creative with. And that's it. Well, we still have basically 3 weeks of school left. So it's plenty of time to work on stuff and get stuff done.
Oh, Mr. McClellan, what day we're gonna leave? When the last day of school? Because you guys kept saying 3 to 2.
The last day is the 18th, and that's a half day.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're gonna finish reading the book today, and we should be able to get through it. Don't read my email, sorry. We should be able to get through it. The one that's on YouTube is like 31 minutes, and we still have well over 31 minutes, so we should be able to finish it. Just to kind of remind you guys of where we were, Gatsby's dead now. RIP. George Wilson came and shot him. Why?
Because he thought that Gatsby killed his wife.
Yes, he thought that Gatsby killed his wife because it was Gatsby's car. And he kind of tracked it to Gatsby. And, you know, Gatsby said, I'll take the fall for Daisy. I'll let everybody think that I was driving. So actually, Daisy killed her. And seems like she's just going to get off scot-free. We'll see in this chapter, you know, if that affected her and Tom's marriage, if she knows about Gatsby dying yet. And then Wilson killed himself as well. So very tragic ending for a lot of people involved. Would anybody like to read? You can read. We can close the door, yes. We can close the door. I would encourage you to read loudly so that everybody can hear. Oh, saying got kicked out, but is back. There he is. You didn't bring your blanket today, Jenny? Ah,
I don't know. No.
I see. All right.
Okay. After 2 years, I remember the rest of that day and that night and the next day, only as an endless drill of police and photographers and newspapermen in and out of Gatsby's front door. A rope stretched across the main gate, and a policeman by it kept out the curious, but little boys soon discovered that they didn't fit through my yards, and there were always a few of them clustered open mouthed at the pool. Someone with a positive manner, perhaps a detective, used the expression madman as he bent over Wilson's body that afternoon. And the adventitious authority of his voice set the key for the newspaper reports next morning. Most of the reports were in that manner, grotesque, circumstantial, eager, and accurate. When Michaelis's testimony at the inquest brought light to Wilson's suspicions of his wife, I thought the hotel would shortly be served up in racy castagnade.
I'm looking that up.
But Catherine, who might have said anything, didn't say a word. She showed a surprising amount of character about it too. Looked at the coroner with determined eyes under that corrected brow of hers, and swore that her sister had never seen Gatsby, that her sister was completely happy with her husband, and her sister had been into no mischief, whatever. She convinced herself of it and cried into her handkerchief as if the very suggestion. So Wilson was reduced to a man deranged by grief, and ordered that the case might remain in the simplest form, and arrested him. But all this part of it seemed remote and unessential. I found myself on Gatsby's side and alone. From the moment I telephoned the news of the catastrophe to West Egg Village, every surmise about him and every practical question was referred to me. At first, I was surprised and confused. Then, as he lay in his house and didn't move or breathe or speak, hour upon hour, it grew upon me that I was responsible because no one else was interested. I mean, with that intense personal interest to which everyone has some vague right at the end. I called up Daisy half an hour after we found him, called her instinctively and without hesitation. But she and Tom had gone away early that afternoon and taken baggage with them. Left no address? No. Say when they'd be back? No. Any idea where they are, how I could reach them? I don't know, can't say. I wanted to get somebody for him. I wanted to go into the room where he lay and reassured him. I'll get somebody for you, Gatsby. Just trust me and I'll get somebody for you. Meyer Wolfsheim name wasn't in the phone book. The butler gave me his office address on Broadway and I called. Information, but by the time I had the number, it was too long after 5 and no one answered the phone. Will you ring again? I've rung 3 times. It's very important. Sorry, I'm afraid no one's there. I went back to the drawing room and thought for an instant that there were chance visitors, all these official people who suddenly saw this. But as they drew back the sheet and looked at Gatsby with unmoved eyes, his protest continued in my brain. Look here, old sport. You've got to get somebody for me. You've got to try hard. I can't go through this alone. Someone started to ask me questions, and I broke away up and going upstairs, looked hastily through the unlocked parts of his desk. He never told me definitely that his parents were dead, but there was nothing, only the picture of Dan Cody, a token of forgotten violence staring down from the wall. Next morning, I sent the butler to New York with a letter to Wolfsheim, which asked for information and urged him to come out on the next train. Their request seemed superfluous when I wrote it. I was sure he'd start when he saw the newspapers, just as I was sure there would be a wire from Daisy before noon. But neither a wire nor Mr. Wolfsheim arrived. No one arrived except more police and photographers and newspapermen. When the butler brought back Wolfsheim's answer, I began to have a feeling of defiance, of scornful solidarity between Gatsby and me against them all.
Let's pause before we read his reply. So Nick's kind of having a hard time because it's his next door neighbor and like they're friends, but you're not usually like, if your next door neighbor dies, you're not usually going to be responsible for them and for like setting up their funeral and everything. But Gatsby just literally doesn't have anyone else. And Nick says it kind of fell to him because nobody else was interested, meaning like nobody else is invested in Gatsby. And even like he tries to call Daisy. She and Tom have left town, so like they don't even know about it. He's trying to get in touch with Meyer Wolfsheim and can't get a hold of him. He doesn't have any family that Nick knows of, so it just is sort of all up to him. And you know, he kind of feels this, like he feels upset at everyone else. He's like, doesn't anybody care about this? Like Gatsby meant something to all of us. You don't even care that he's dead. So he's trying to get somebody on board, but that's kind of why he says it feels like it's Gatsby and me against everybody, even though Gatsby's dead, because he's just trying to like do right by him.
You want to know something messed up?
Yeah.
He said like people cared about him. Like no, they were curious about him. No one truly cared ish.
Yeah, that's exactly right, LeBron. Like he had all these people coming into his home once a week. He was involved in business with all these people, and like they were curious about him enough to like, you know, speculate and create rumors and stuff, but nobody really knew him. Nobody was close with him, and they didn't really, as long as they were able to like come and drink his liquor and eat his food, then that's all they really need from him. It's very sad. It's a sad life for Gatsby. Let's see what Mr. Wolfsheim has to say.
Dear Mr. Caraway, this has been one of the most terrible shocks of my life to me. I can hardly believe it that it is true at all. Such a mad act that man did should make us all think. I cannot come down now as I am tied up in some very important business and cannot be mixed up in this thing now. If there is anything I can do a little later, let me know in a letter by Edgar. I hardly know where I am when I hear about a thing like this and completely knocked down and out. Yours truly, Meyer Wolfsheim, and then hasty addenda beneath. Let me know about the funeral, etc. Do not know his family at all. When the phone rang that afternoon and long distance said Chicago was calling, I thought this would be Daisy at last, but the connection came through and it's a man's voice, very thin and very far away. This is Slagle speaking? Yes, the name is unfamiliar. Oh, but no, isn't it? Get my wire? There haven't been any wires. Young Park's in trouble, he said rapidly. They picked him up when he handed the bonds over the counter. They got a circular from New York given them the numbers just by Miss Foreman. What do you know about that? Hey, you never can tell in these big towns. Hello? I interrupted breathlessly. Oh, look here, this isn't Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Gatsby's dead. There is a long silence on the other end of the wire, followed by an exclamation, then a quick squawk as the connection was broken. I think it was on the third day that a telegram signed Henry C. Gatz arrived from a town in Minnesota. It was said that only that the sender was leaving immediately to postpone the funeral until he came. It was Gatsby's father, a solemn old man, very helpless and dismayed, bundled up in a long cheap ulster against the warm September day. His eyes leaked continuously with excitement, and when I took the bag and umbrella from his hands, he began to pull so incessantly at his sparse gray beard that I had difficulty in getting off his coat. He was on the point of collapse, so I took him into the meeting room and made him sit down while I sent for something to eat. But he wouldn't eat, and a glass of milk spilled from his trembling hand. I saw it in the Chicago newspaper, he said. It was all in the Chicago newspaper. I started right away. I didn't know how to reach you. His eyes seeing nothing, moved ceaselessly about the room. It was a madman, he said. He must have been mad. When you like some coffee, I urged him. I don't want anything right now. I'm all right now, Mr. Caraway. Well, I'm all right now. Where have they got Jimmy? I took him into the drawing room.
let's pause for just a second. So when he says Jimmy, he's talking about Gatsby, because if y'all remember, his real name was James Gatz, but he told them that his parents were dead. He told Nick that, and that like he had come into this money from when his family died. And now it turns out he does have a father after all, which is very surprising. And like poor Nick, he's like, I didn't know how to reach you. Also, like, I didn't know you existed. And just like having no idea about Gatsby's background and like finding out so much stuff after he has died, that's pretty rough. And then also like having to field these phone calls from like whatever seedy business Gatsby has going on, and like having to tell those people that he's dead. This is like a lot of it's a lot for Nick, for somebody that he's not even like that close with. I mean, he loved Gatsby obviously, but you know, they've known each other for a couple months at this point, and he's just having to deal with all this stuff. Pretty rough. Let's see how his father reacts to everything.
After a little while, Mr. Gatz opened the door and came out, his mouth ajar, his face flushed slightly, his eyes became isolated and unpunctual tears. He had reached an age where death no longer has the quality of ghastly surprise, and when he looked around him now for the first time and saw the height and splendor of the hall and the great rooms opening out from it into other rooms, his grief began to mix with an awed pride. I helped him to a bedroom upstairs while he took off his coat and vest, and I told him that all arrangements had been deferred until he came. I didn't know what you want, Mr. Gatsby. Gatz, his name, Mr. Gatz. I thought you might want to take the body cuts. He shook his head. Jimmy always liked the better guys. He rose up to his position and asked, were you a friend of my boys, mister? We were close friends. He had a big future before him, you know. He was only a young man, but he had a lot of brain power here. He touched his head impressively and I nodded. If he'd have lived, he'd have been a great man. A man like James J. Hill, he'd have helped build up the country. That's true, I said uncomfortably. He fumbled at the embroidered coverlet, trying to take it from the bed, and lay down stiffly, was instantly asleep. That night, an obviously frightened person called up and demanded to know who I was before I would give him his name. Oh, this is Mr. Caraway. I said, oh, he said earlier, this is
Clip Springer, who he was in it earlier. He like basically lives at Gatsby's house. He's just there so often they call him the boarder. So he stays there sometimes. He like played the piano or organ or something for Daisy and Gatsby when she came over for the first time.
I was relieved too, for that seemed to promise another sprint at Gatsby's grave. I didn't want it to be in the papers and draw a sightseeing crowd, so I'd been calling up a few people myself. They were hard to find. The funeral's tomorrow, I said, 3 o'clock here at the house. I'd wish you'd tell anybody who'd be interested. Oh, I will, he broke out hastily. Of course, I'm not likely to see anybody, but if I do. His tone made me suspicious. Of course you'll be there yourself. Well, I'll certainly try. What I called up about is, wait a minute. How, I interrupted, how about saying you'll come? Well, the fact is, the truth of the matter is that I'm staying with people up here in Greenwich, and they rather expect me to be with them tomorrow. In fact, there's sort of a picnic or something. Of course, I'll do my very best to get away. I ejaculated and I screamed, huh? And he must have heard me, for he went on nervously. What I called up about was a pair of shoes I left there. I wonder if it'd be too much trouble to have the butler send them on. You see, they're tennis shoes, and I'm sort of helpless about them. My address is here of B. I didn't hear the rest of it because I haven't received her.
And who can blame him either? Like Gatsby gave you a place to live, and you're like, oh, I'll let people know about his funeral if I see anybody, but I don't think I can come because I have a picnic to go to tomorrow. Could you just maybe like send me back my shoes that I left there? Like, to the person who gave you a place to live, it's so heartless. And he like at this point is looking like it's just gonna be Gatsby, or not Gatsby, Nick and Mr. Gatz at the funeral, which will be very sad considering how many people he had at his house all the time. Sad.
Oh, what about his mother?
It doesn't really say anything about his mother. I think we can assume that she has died at some point. Yeah, I don't think it really mentions her.
After that, I felt a certain shame for Gatsby. One gentleman to whom my telephone implied that he had got what he deserved. However, that was my fault, for he was one of those who used to sneer most bitterly at Gatsby on the courage of Gatsby's liquor, and I should have known better than I thought. The morning of the funeral, I went up to New York to see Meyer Wolfsheim. I couldn't seem to reach him any other way. The door that I pushed open on the advice of an elevator boy was marked the Swastika Holding Company. And at first, there didn't seem to be anyone inside. But when I shouted hello several times and in vain, an argument broke out behind a partition. And presently, a lovely Jewess appeared at an interior and scrutinized me with my hostile eyes. "Nobody's in," she said. "Mr. Wolfstein gone to Chicago." The first part of this was obviously untrue, for someone had begun to whistle the rosary tune with Louisa. "Please say that Mr. Carraway wants to see him. I can't get him back from Chicago, can I?" At this moment, a voice unmistakably Wolfstein called Stella from the other side of the room. "Leave your name on the desk," she put under the desk, she said quickly. I'll give it to him when he gets back, but I know he's here." She took a step toward me and began to slide her hand indignantly up and down her. "You young men can force your way in here anytime," she spoke. "We are getting sick and tired of it. When I say he's in Chicago, he's in Chicago." I mentioned Gatsby. "Oh," he looked over at me again. "Will you just, what was her name?" She vanished, and in a moment, Miss Meyer Wolfsheim stood solemnly in the doorway, holding out both his hands. He drew me into his office, remarking in a reverent voice that it was a sad time for all of us not to leave the car. "My memory goes back to when I first met him," he said. "A young major just out of the army and covered over with medals he had gotten in the war. He was so hard up, he had to keep on wearing his uniform because he couldn't buy some regular clothes. For the first time I saw him, he comes into wine Brenner's pool room at 43rd Street and asked for a job.
Hey, Miss McLean.
Hey, we're just trying to finish the book. We've got Cece reading.
He hadn't eaten anything for a couple of days. "Come on, have some lunch with me," I said. He ate more than $4 worth of food in half an hour. "Did you start him in business?" I inquired. "Start him? I made him." "Oh." I raised up out of nothing, right out of the gutter. I saw right away he was a fine appearing, gentlemanly young man, and when he told me he was in Oxford, I knew I could use him good. I got him to join up in the American Legion, and he used to stand right here. Right off, he did some work for a client of mine up to Albany. We were so thick like that and everything. He held up two bulbous fingers, always together. I wondered if this partnership had included the World Series transaction in 1919. "Now he's dead," I said after a moment. "You were his closest friend, so I know you'll want to come to his funeral this afternoon." "I'd like to come." "Well, come then." The hair in his nostrils quivered slightly as he shook his eyes filled with tears. "I can't do it. I can't get mixed up in it," he said. "There's nothing to get mixed up in. It's all over now. When a man gets killed, I never like to get mixed up in it in any way. I keep out. When I was a young man, it was different. If a friend of mine died, no matter how, I stuck with them to the end. You may think that's sentimental, but I mean it to the bitter end." I saw that for some reason of his own, he was determined not to come, so I stood up. "Are you a college man?" he inquired suddenly. For a moment, I thought he was going to suggest a
Connection.
but he only nodded and shook my hand. "Let us learn to show our friendship for a man when he was alive and not after he is dead," he suggested. "After that, my only rule is to let everything alone." When I left his office, the sky had turned dark, and I got back to West Egg and in Jerusalem. After changing my clothes, I went next door and found Mr. Gatz walking up and down excitedly in the hall. His pride in his son and his son's possessions was continually growing, and now he had something to show me. "Jimmy sent me this picture he took out of his wallet with trembling fingers. Look here." It was a photograph of the house. cracked in the corners and dirty with many hands. He had pointed out every detail to me eagerly. Look there, and then saw admiration from my eyes. He had shown it so often that I think it was more real to him now than the house itself. Jimmy sent it to me. I think it's a very pretty picture. It shows up well. Very well. Had you seen him lately? He had come out to see me 2 years ago and brought me to the house I live in now. Of course, we was broke when he ran off from home, but now I see there is a reason for it. He knew he had a big future in front of him, and ever since he made it a success, he was very generous with me. He seemed reluctant to put away the picture, held it for another minute, lingeringly before my eyes. Then he returned to the wallet and pulled from his pocket a ragged old copy of a book called Hopple on Cassie. Look here, this is the book he had when he was a boy. It just shows you though. He opened it at the back cover and turned it around for me to see. On the last fly leaf was printed the word schedule and the date September 12, 1906. And underneath, rise from bed 6 a.m., dumbbell exercise and wall scaling 6:15 to 6:30, study electricity 7:15, 8:15, work 8:30, 4:30, baseball and sports 4:35, practice
Elocution.
elocution and how to attain it 5 to 6, study need and bitches 7 to 9. General resolves, no wasting time at chapters or no more smoking or chewing, bath every other day, read one improving book or magazine per week, save $5, $3 per week, be better to parents. I come across this book by accident. It just shows you, don't it? It just shows you. Jimmy was bound to get ahead. He had always had some resolves like this or something. Do you notice what he's got about improving his mind? He's always great for that. He told me that I eat like a hog once and I beat him for it. He was reluctant to close the book, reading each item aloud, then looking eagerly at me. I think he rather expected me to copy down the list for my own use.
Hang on a second. Did we read at some point that Gatsby was 35? Is
No,
that
we
what?
came up with that conclusion?
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Even if, okay, so if that's true, he wrote this in 1906, which was 16 years before the book. So if he's 35, then wait, that can't be right. 35. So he started this when he was 19, this like routine of every day and like improving himself. If you look at all the things on the list, he's trying to improve himself physically, mentally, socially, like practicing elocution and poise. Basically, like you spend an hour a day on like how to speak well and like walk well and all, all these other things, just like trying to get himself ahead and like read improving books or magazines every week, which would be like self-help books now. So from the age of 19 on, he's just like trying to push himself that one step further, which is in line with what we know about Gatsby. Like he is ambitious. He does try to get ahead. Sometimes he cuts corners to do it, but this is something that his dad can be proud of. Like, look at him. He was always trying to get ahead. He was always trying to improve himself. And that's, he's proud of him for that. So, he's sad, but he's looking back on it and like, not just for all the cool stuff he has in his big house and everything, but like, look at my kid and like what he did with himself and how much he improved himself. It's nice.
A little before 3, the Lutheran minister arrived from Flushing, and I began to look involuntarily out the windows for other cars. So did Gatsby's father. As the time passed and the servants came in and stood waiting in the hall, his eyes began to blink anxiously as he spoke of the rain in a worried, uncertain way. The minister glanced several times at his watch, so I took him aside and asked him to wait for half an hour, but it was no use. Nobody came. At 5 o'clock, our procession of 3 cars reached the cemetery and stopped in a thick drizzle beside the gate. First, a motor hearse horribly black and wet. Then Mr. Yates and the minister and I in a limousine, and a little later 4 or 5 servants and a postman from Mustang and Gatsby station wagon, all wet to skin. As we started through the gate in the cemetery, I heard a car stop and the sound of someone splashing after us over the soggy ground. I looked around and it was a man with owl-eye glasses whom I found marveling over Gatsby's book in the library one night 3 months before. I'd never seen him since then. I don't know how he knew about the funeral or even his name. The rain poured down into his thick glasses and he took them off and wiped them to see the protecting canvas and wool from Gatsby's grave. I tried to think about Gatsby then for a moment, but he was already too far away and I can only remember without resentment that day he hadn't sent a message or a flyer. Dimly I heard someone murmur, "Blessed are the dead that the rain falls on." And the owl-eyed man said amen to that in a brave voice. We struggled down quickly through the rain and to the cars. Owl eyes spoke to me without again. I couldn't get to the house, he announced. Neither could anybody else. Go on, he started. Why, my God, these if you go there by the hundreds. He took off his glasses and wiped them again outside in it. The poor son of a bitch, he said. One of my most vivid memories is of coming back west from prep school and later from college at Christmas time. Those who went farther than Chicago would gather in the Oldham Union Station at 6 o'clock of a December evening with a few Chicago friends already caught up into their own holiday gaieties to bid them a hasty goodbye. I remember the fur coats of the girls returning from Miss This or That's, and the chatter of the frozen breath and the hands waving overhead as we caught sight of old acquaintances and the matchings of invitations. Are you going to the Ordways, the Hershey's, the Schultz's, and the long green tickets past Tightner glove hands? And the last, the murky yellow cars of the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad looking cheerful as Christmas itself on the tracks beside the gate. When we pulled out into the winter night, the real snow, our snow, began to stretch out the side and twinkle against the window, and the dim lights of small Wisconsin stations moved up by sharp wild bursts came suddenly into the air. We drew in deep breaths of it as we walked back from dinner through the cold vegetables, unutterably aware of our identity with this country for one strange hour before we melted indistinguishably into it again. That's my Middle West. Not the wheat or the prairies or the lost way towns, but the thrilling returning trains of my youth, and the street lamps and sleigh bells in the frosty dark, and the shadows of holly wreaths thrown by lighted windows on the snow. I am a part of that, a little solemn with the feel of those long winters, a little complacent from growing up in the Caraway house in a city where dwellings are still called through decades by family name. I see now that this had been a story of the West. After all, Tom and Gatsby and Daisy and Jordan and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common, which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. Even when the East excited me most, even when I was most keenly aware of its superiority to the board, sprawling, swollen towns beyond the Ohio, and was the
Interminable.
inquisitions which spared only the children and the very old. Even then, it had always for me a quality of distortion. West Egg especially still figures in my more fantastic dreams. I see it as a night scene by El Greco, 100 houses at one conventional and grotesque, crouching under sullen overhanging sky and a lustreless moon. In the foreground, 4 solemn men in dress suits are walking along the sidewalk with a stretcher which lies a drunken woman in a white evening dress. Her hands, which dangles over the sides, sparkles pulled with jewels. Bravely the men turn in at the round house, but no one knows the woman's name and no one cares.
Pause for just a second. So like these last few paragraphs, I think are really good examples of modernist literature, because he is just kind of like ruminating on this moment in time that maybe wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be. And he has that line, unutterably aware of our identity with this country for one strange hour before he melded indistinguishably into it again. And like post World War I, everybody is really sort of trying to like find their own identity, find their place in the world, and figure out what their life is supposed to be about. And he's like, just for a minute, we sort of had that, and then it just like faded away, and we didn't really know, like, no, none of us really knew what we were doing. And I think he's gonna say that again in a few minutes. But just like the sort of looking back, being nostalgic about a thing that in reality was maybe not that great. And that maybe they didn't actually have a handle on things after all.
After Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me like that, distorted beyond my eyes' power of correction. So when the blue smoke of brittle leaves was in the air and the wind blew the wet laundry stiff on the line, I decided to come back home. There was one thing that had to be done before I left, an awkward, unpleasant thing that perhaps had better have been left alone. But I wanted to leave things in order and not just trust that obliging and indifferency to sweep my refuse away. I saw Jordan Baker and talked over and around what had happened to us together and what had happened afterward to me, and she lay perfectly still listening in a big chair. She was dressed to play golf, and I remember thinking she looked like a good illustration. Her chin raised a little jauntily, her hair the color of an autumn leaf, her face the same brown tint as the fingerless glove on her knee. When I had finished, she told me without comment that she was engaged to another man.
Quick of her to move on.
Yeah, I doubted that, though there were several where she could have married at a nod of her head, but I pretended to be surprised. For just a minute, I wondered if I wasn't making a mistake, and I thought it all over again quickly and got up to say goodbye. Nevertheless, you did throw me over, said Jordan suddenly. You threw me over on the telephone. I don't give a damn about you now, but it was a new experience for me, and I felt a little dizzy for a while. We shook hands, and and do you remember, she added, a conversation we had once about driving the car? Why, not exactly. You said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver? Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest and straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride. I'm 30, I said. I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honor. She didn't answer. Angry and half in love with her and tremendously sorry, I turned away. One afternoon, late in October, I saw Tom Buchanan. He was walking ahead of me along Fifth Avenue in his alert, aggressive way, his hands out front a little from his body as if to fight off interference. His head moving sharply here and there to avoid overtaking, here and there, adapting itself to his restless eyes. Just as I slowed up to avoid overtaking him, he stopped and began frowning into the windows of the jewelry store. Suddenly he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand. What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking hands? Yes, you know what I think. Do you object to shaking hands with me? Yes, you know what I think of you. You're crazy, Nick, he said quickly. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you. Tom, I inquired, what did you say to Wilson that afternoon? He stared at me without a word, and I knew I had guessed right about those missing hours. I started to turn away, but he took a step after me and grabbed my arm. I told the truth, he said. He came to the door while we were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word. We were getting ready to leave, and when I sent down word that we weren't in. What?
When I sent down word that we weren't in.
We weren't in. He tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to tell me if I hadn't told him who owned the farm. His hand was on a revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. He broke out defiantly. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming. He threw dust into your eyes just like he did in previous. But he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like he'd run over a dog, and he never even stopped his car. There was nothing I could say except the one unutterable fact that it wasn't true.
All right, this is probably the last time I'm going to stop you because we're nearly done. But he definitely like holds this against Tom, and we sort of like find out in this part that of the story that we didn't really have, because we didn't know how he traced the car as belonging to Gatsby, and now it turns out he didn't trace it. Tom straight up told him. And I mean, if really his death, Gatsby's death is kind of on Tom's shoulders, because he wouldn't have ever known otherwise. And like, granted, he's like, oh, well, Wilson had a gun the whole time. Like, he would have killed me if I didn't tell him. But the kicker about it all is that Gatsby didn't kill Myrtle. Daisy did. And the wrong person has suffered for this. And it's because Tom told Wilson that it was Gatsby's fault. And then just before we finish here, there was also the bit where Jordan said, I met another bad driver, didn't I? And I don't know if you guys remember that conversation, but she was like, oh, I'm a bad driver, but as long as other people are careful, then I don't really need to worry about it. And they kind of made this a metaphor between like being a driver and like dealing with other people. So when she says, I met another bad driver, didn't I? She's really like, hey, you were kind of careless with me and you didn't really treat me right, which is fair of her to say, I think. Like, he just kind of dropped her because she was friends with these people, more or less. Let's finish.
And if you think I didn't have my share of suffering, look here. When I went to give up that flat and saw that damn box of dog biscuits sitting there on the sidewalk, I sat down and cried like a baby. By God, it was awful. I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was to him entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They snatched up things and creatures, and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess that they had made. I shook hands with them. It seemed silly not to, for I felt suddenly as though I was talking to a child. Then he went into the jewelry store to buy a pearl necklace, or perhaps only a pair of cuffs buttons, rid of my provincial squeamishness forever. Gatsby's house was still empty when I left. The grass on his lawn had grown as long as mine. One of the taxi drivers in the village never took a fare past the entrance gate without stopping for a minute and pointing inside. Perhaps it was one who drove Gatsby and Daisy and Gatsby over to East End the night of the accident, and perhaps he had made a story about him all on his own. I didn't want to hear it, and I avoided him when I got off the train. I spent my Saturday nights in New York because those gleaming, dazzling parties of his were with me so vividly that I could still hear the music and the laughter faint and incessant from his garden, and the cars going up and down his drive. One night I did hear a material car there and saw its lights stop at his front steps, but I didn't investigate. Probably it was some final guest who had been away at the ends of the earth and didn't know that the party was over. On the last night, with my trunk packed and my car sold to the grocer, I went over and looked at the huge incoherent failure of the house once more. On the white steps and obscene words scrawled by some boy with a piece of brick, and stood out clearly in the moonlight, and I erased it, drawing my shoe raspingly along the sand. Then I wandered down to the beach and sprawled out on the sand. Most of the big shore places were closed, and now and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy moving glow of a ferry boat across the sound. And as the moon rose higher, the inessential houses began to melt away until gradually I became aware of the old islands of spirit that flowered once up for Dutch sailors' eyes, the fresh green breast of the New World. It vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last, the greatest of all human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent. Compelled into an aesthetic contemplation, he neither understood nor desired face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to his blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly feel to grasp it. He didn't know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in the vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the republic ruled on under the ninth. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year was seized before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms further, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
The end. And great timing because we only have 3 minutes left of class. We will talk about this a bit tomorrow, particularly this last bit. Wait, today's Tuesday, right? Okay. So Thursday, I think most of you guys have your EOC for US history, most if not all. So we will not see each other on Thursday. So we'll talk about this tomorrow and a little bit more on Friday and review for our test. And then Monday we'll have our test. Okay, I gotta let you guys go. I will see you tomorrow. And we have just